Welcome back to the channel. One of the things I enjoy most about my data science journey is the ability to leverage several Python libraries for data visualization purposes. The ability to go from a scatter plot to a bar plot is just as easy as going from a scatter plot to a more sophisticated joint plot, in which we will talk about in this video, just by understanding the underlying framework within certain libraries like Matplotlib and Seaborn. And in this case, we're going to use the Seaborn library to do that. First, we'll walk through the documentation. Then I'll show you how we can build a simple scatter plot and how we can take that understanding and extend that into a joint plot. Let's get started. So first we have the documentation for the Seaborn joint plot. And you can see that this is the typical Seaborn argument layout for many of their figures, where we have our Seaborn, in which we typically import under the alias SNS. And then we have this joint plot method. And after this data argument, we can specify X, Y, hue, and other arguments within this method, and then continue on to creating our figures. And so once you understand this scheme, you can go from a joint plot to many other figures within the Seaborn library. So if we go to our notebook, we will get started. And to demonstrate this, I will use the Irish dataset. I will soon go back to some of the chemistry data, but I'm working on a larger project that I will reveal to you hopefully in the next few videos. But trust me, I will get back to that. But the Irish dataset is great because a lot of folks are familiar with it. It's a fairly well understood data structure and will help to demonstrate this point of our joint plot. But again, I will go back to the more scientific data momentarily. So what I'm doing here is importing, using the sklearn datasets module to load the Irish dataset. And then I'm going to use Seaborn, import it as SNS to import the Seaborn library, as well as this warnings, because again, there are future warnings that tend to pop up as they've been doing a lot of updates to many of these libraries. And then of course I have this command here just to improve the resolution of those figures. So I'm going to run this cell. In the next cell, I am loading my Irish dataset as a data frame, in which I'm specifying as frame equals true. And from this dictionary, I'm just loading the frame as a data frame. And then I'm renaming the columns just to be A, B, C, D, and target, just to simplify the arguments for this explanation. And then I'm changing the target data type to string. And so here you can see all those changes, in which these columns are typically, actually I could just show you. If I comment this line out, you can see these are the original column names, but I would prefer just to use the shorter names, A, B, C, D, just for the purpose of this story. And so within this tutorial, let's make our scatter plot and do that pretty quickly. To do that, we will use the sns.scatterplot, and we can specify our data as df. And let's just split the line just to make the visualization easier. And we'll set X equal to A, which is why I use the shorter column names, and we'll set Y equal to B. It doesn't necessarily matter what these are. And then if we stop here and plot it, we have a pretty standard scatter plot. Now, one thing that would make this much easier is to then add some hue variable, in which I'm going to make my hue parameter the target column. And you can see that we have our categorical coloring, where our targets are now 0, 1, and 2. And that is, if you try to do this at home and you skip this line here, let me rerun this and now run this cell. You see we get this quantitative coloring where it attempts to give us a gradient, assuming some ordered relationship between 0, 1, and 2. But in this case, we want them to be categorical. So I'm just going to force that data type as a string and rerun this, and you'll see how it updates the default coloring. A color map that's applied to this data set. And then if we want to get rid of this axis labeling here, we can use a semicolon, or we could import matplotlib and use the plt.show method. And one other thing to do is to despine, and that will by default remove the top and right spine from this figure, which in my opinion makes it look a little bit cleaner. And so this is our scatter plot, in which we can do this pretty quickly. And you probably are doing this, but now let's switch to a joint plot. And just to show you how similar they are, I'm going to copy this bit of code here and paste that in the cell below. And so we have our scatter plot, and now I want to switch to a joint plot, and you'll get a sense of what that plot is. So I'm just going to change the method from scatterplot to the joint plot. And we're going to keep our data as df, our x as a, and our y as b. And we will even continue to have our target column. The parameter I'm going to add to this is kind equal to scatter. And so that will ensure that we have a scatter plot in the center of this joint plot. And so now you can see the benefit of having our joint plot, where we can now see, in this case, we have our kernel distribution of these respective parameters along the x-axis for A and B. And because we specified a hue variable, the coloring for hue will also be matched onto these marginal distribution plots here. And it helps us just to get a better sense of the distribution of these parameters. Now, without the hue argument, we can use, there are other options for the kind. We have hex, in which we will get this hex plot. And if we were to continue to have hue in there, we would get this value error. We can't specify a hue with this kind hex. It is not currently supported. And so just commenting that out will resolve that value error, and we'll get this plot. So depending on if you've got a multi-dimensional data set or data set where you have some parameters where we need to specify the hue argument, we can still get a pretty good sense of the distribution of these variables based on this hex plot. There are other options. If you go back to the documentation and go to kind, you see we have a scatter, KDE, hist, regression, residual. So let's make a hist plot. And again, you can see we have something that looks pretty similar to a hex. And depending on the type of story you want to tell, some of these might make more sense than others. But with this one, you can go back to specifying the hue variable and having your target points illustrated based on the color. Now, as a bonus, there's something else I enjoy doing with these sorts of plots. Let's go back to scatter. And when I'm making figures, there's times where I'm using Plotly Express and Seaborn in Matplotlib, and I want a consistent color scheme. And in fact, I prefer the Plotly color scheme, the default qualitative color scheme. So I'm going to show you how we can actually incorporate that into this plot really easily, just as sort of a bonus piece of information in case you're in the same boat and want to have a consistent color scheme throughout your notebook. So to do that, we can import Plotly Express, and from there we can use the colors.qualitative and then specify that we want, in this case, let's just use the Plotly theme. And what this will return for us is a color list. And in this case, these are our hex colors. And let's just call this color list. And what I want to pass next will be palette. And from there, I want my color list. Actually, I should have specified just the first 3 colors. So what this is saying is that because the color list by default is has 10 entries, but I only need 3 for this categories, I'm going to specify, just limit this to 3 and avoid this error message here, and it will go away. And just that easily, we can use, in this case, the Plotly default qualitative color map. And again, I prefer this color scheme in most of my figures. And when I'm also using Plotly Express figures, and this being the default, it's nice, but you do have a lot of other options. As you could see in this list here, one of the other ones that you can use if you wanted is T10, and just see all of the types of options that you have. So keep that in mind if you're working through a story and you know this is going to be a very visual story and want to use consistent coloring, that you can do this. You can do this the other way with Seaborn color maps as well. In the case, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.